Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today, we are here with James Keblas, former director of Seattle Office of Film and Music, a noted pioneer in the music cities concept, and advocate of nighttime management strategies. Building upon the first economic study of Seattle's music industry, James became the first director of the Office of Film and Music. Working with RHI, he developed the mayor's 8-point initiative, including a recommendation for flexible closing hours and improvements in night transportation, security training, and patron accountability.
Hey James, it's so great to see you. It's been too long.
Hello, Jim. This is very exciting. RHI talk. It's been a while for me.
So, why don't you give just a brief background of how you got to where you were? I guess around 2002, 2003, when we first came into contact with each other.
Yeah, well, I think it was a little bit later than that. So my background and how I ended up on this call with you now kind of starts when I was in the music scene here in Seattle and kind of, just part of the whole thing in the early 90s and all of that. I was dropping in and out of college. I was kind of, lost my way, but I was doing cool stuff. Like I was working at Nasty Mix Records, that promoting some Mix a lot, and like this one white kid hanging out in this, company run by, non-white people. And then I ended up being involved with music venues. Like there was a legendary music venue in Seattle called the Velvet Elvis down in Pioneer Square that was really a pioneer of the all ages movement here and kind of post grunge and all of that. But as all of that was going down, the city was really at odds with the music scene that we were doing, involved with. And the very thing that I thought was really valuable, civic leaders and political leaders and influencers and stuff actually didn't like it. And they were trying to change its identity to be this kind of world-class city or whatever that they thought Seattle should be that was different than what I thought it should be. And that's what inspired me to go back to college. And I ended up getting involved with urban planning program there. And that's when I brought my ideas around the music community and urban planning together to think about what makes a place, what makes a city important is not like the streets and transportation issues and open space. It's people. People make the place. And so I would think about my days in music and how musicians and a band can bring so many different kinds of people together just to see that one act, right? And so what if we thought of music as an urban planning tool and use it to develop the kind of place that we want to be and live and work and all of those things? And that just happened to be when Chris Novoselic from Nirvana was thinking about what he was going to do after Nirvana ended. And he put his efforts into this thing called Jam Pack, Joint Artists Musicians Pack. And this is in 1994.
I remember that, yeah.
It was a political action committee. And he started kind of galvanizing support to fight the city about the way it was coming down on music and shutting teen dance ordinances and poster bans and all of these crazy laws that were stifling the music scene. So I got involved with that and took down some laws, actually like sued the city, and then turned our attention to the politicians that made those laws and got them out and got good ones in. And we were all just kind of rolling. It was a big community all gathering to try to make Seattle a better place. And then what from there created the Vera Project, which is a youth music and arts center here in Seattle. Been going over for 20 years. I was one of the co-founders of that. To try to not only be anti things, but to be pro things and to think about what we would do. Got the city involved in that. And then we got a mayor elected, Mayor Nichols, helped get the mayor elected rather, against another candidate, Sidran, who was the author of a lot of the laws that we fought against. So it was like kind of good and evil kind of a fight, We created what became the Office of Film and Music, which was an economic development agency. And then in 2005, I was appointed by then Mayor Nichols to run that office. And when you have music and you're trying to grow the music scene, the most important part, I think, the most important ingredient in trying to develop a music scene is having live music venues.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things that are important about a music scene, but live music venues are critically important because that's where musicians meet and meet other musicians, cut their teeth, hone their sound, where audiences get developed. It's where the streets kind of come alive. But when you have live music, you have nighttime activity and you have people, and then you have more conflict. And we were running up against that. And that's when you and I met. That's the
Yeah.
backstory.
I remember that whole conflict that existed back then, but I remember your JPEG or whatever that name, that
Jam
group,
pack, yeah.
Jampack. You had done an economic study, and I remember, as much as Seattle was known for its biotech industries, the study showed that music created more economic activity than the biotech industry.
Yeah,
And
it was like right up there with maritime and I mean,
yeah,
and
it was a
that
big
study,
big study. Yeah, that was
yeah,
one of the real first studies that really did this. In New York, early on in the same period of time, did their nightlife study, but that led to a number of other cities doing that. Now, you talk about a music city, and when I first met you, you had set up this network of people, and we ended up doing our conference in 2007 in New Orleans, just about what does it take to become a music city.
yeah.
But you had your own definition. So give me like the top level points of what makes a music city.
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to have musicians. That's the most important part for a music city, and you have to have places for musicians to play. And I think live music venues, like I was saying, is critical. So that's the mandatory piece. But the things that go above and beyond that to kind of make a music city for us, and what we were trying to do when we were in the early stages of having this network, was public support for this. So outwardly demonstrating, putting a flag, in the ground.
You were saying you have to plant that flag in making a music city, making a statement about a music city. And one of the most successful campaigns that I remember you guys worked on, this was, I think, during that transition where, there was a big anti-nightlife, very aggressive policing enforcement approach to nightlife venues, what we call social venues. And you organized the Nightlife Association under the Office of Nightlife. In fact, somebody on your staff helped to organize that group, which is not very easy to do.
Yeah.
And then you worked together during the campaign, the political campaign of getting people elected who are more music friendly. And you did this kind of Saturday night event. Can you explain what you did with that and what was the motivation for that? Because I know you took out a full page ad and it was all well timed. So what was that campaign?
Well, a little bit, the origin story of the Seattle Nightlife Association came from just government officials and enforcement departments just cracking down what seemed to be kind of unfairly on venues. And so them organizing themselves, we, as the city, now I'm running a city department at the time, we got involved with that group to say, okay, let's help you get organized and also help you operate transparently out in the public so that people can see that you're good operators. And then so we'd host meetings at City Hall, and we would have public officials participate in them to try to get people familiar with one another and try to build trust. And when that trust was going, it would be great. When that wasn't going well, when the trust was falling, is when you had conflicts. And there were some new laws being put forward that the Seattle Nightlife Association did not like, and they said you cannot push these forward. And government officials said they're going to do it anyway, and they said, well, we're going to stop you from doing that. And one of the things that they did was did a thing called When the Night the Music Died. They got all of the venues many of the venues across the whole city to stop the music, turn on the lights at around midnight, and make a public service announcement to all of the patrons at the venue, at the clubs, everywhere, that said, if these people get elected, if these laws get passed, this is what Seattle is going to be like. The music's going to stop. The fun is going to be over. You're going to have to go home. So here's what you do. And then there was then an action plan that they were given, and kind of these calls to action. And it ended up being very effective, raising money, awareness, and ultimately votes, and gaining a lot of power for the Seattle nightlife.
Our work had defined kind of a platform for moving forward. That's how we came in contact with you. But we had done some interviews and focus groups, and we focus in on transportation and public safety and policing strategies and venue security and training. And so that was kind of the framework that we presented. And I remember you called me up at the last minute to come. There was a meeting with the mayor's office, and we had a lot of those people that were involved in our project were all sitting around the table. And you had been to San Francisco, and you brought a group of people there about the Entertainment Commission, and you were looking at different models from different cities. And I remember having a conversation and saying, I got very frustrated actually. And I looked around the table. You had your nightlife people, you had your police, you had your business community, you had your elected officials. You were all sitting around the table. I said, you don't need to go find out what other cities are doing. You have a plan and you have everybody here.
Yeah.
And I said, just do it. That's when Nike came out with that campaign, and I left. And you took that on and came up with the mayor's initiative. And I don't know how much we had a role in that, but I think it was kind of coincidental or synchronistic that the end of our project really led to this mayor's campaign. So can you talk about that 8-point campaign or how you arrived at that? Because today it's still a relevant framework for any city to use.
Yeah, I revisited before this conversation, and I'm surprised at how I was like, oh, this is actually really good. Something, it is a model in some ways. But the reason this came about was because, so you had started working with the city to help some of these issues before you and I had met. And when I because so you started with the city, I started in 2005, you started before that. And when I got into this position and was tasked with trying to figure this thing out, I was really struggling. I mean, I couldn't get the support of the police. And then your name came up. I think it was Councilmember Licata, and then Captain Pierce, I think at the time, said, we did this stuff with Jim Peters, it didn't really go anywhere. So maybe you could pick that up and drive it forward. And that's when I what's RHI, and looked you up and saw the stuff, and I saw your approach was very diplomatic. It was not one singular side. You were looking at the situations with an honest, objective point of view and using data. And I was like, what? This is genius. Let's bring this in. And that's when you and I really got close, and I started really paying attention to what you were doing. That's where I learned all the language to use. That's where I learned kind of the facilitation technique around nightlife specifically. And I tried to grab all the players back at the table. You were there for some of those conversations. I brought you back. You were saying, oh, why am I back here again? Well, the reason you were back there again was because now I was leading it and I had to start from the top. But you gave me the power to be able to do it. You kind of reestablished that. And I, knowing how much you like to see action, really felt like I needed to live up to that expectation. And that's when we created the Seattle Nightlife Initiative, which was this 8-point plan that had a combination of things that we determined would make a safe, vibrant nightlife in Seattle. And we didn't just put the burden in one area. We put the burden on the city. We put the burden on club owners, and we put the burden on patrons, and introduced all kinds of things that everyone had to do. Some people got added things, and some people had more restrictive things. So for instance, we created a noise ordinance in the city of Seattle for the first time. Music industry fought noise ordinance over and over and over again, but we were able to craft one where they agreed to that was very surgical and very fair in how it was approached and got to the precise problems. And they supported that. We got the police to have community meetings on a monthly basis with nightclub owners in the precincts. We created a thing called the liquor sticker, which allowed cars, if someone had been drinking too much and they would be tempted to drive home because they couldn't leave their car at the meter because they'd get a ticket if they took an alternative way home, they could buy this new sticker that they could put on and come and get their car the next morning. And all kinds of night owl transportation service. We gave the officers the ability to give drunk and disorderly fines to individuals, to
You call it
patrons.
the meathead ordinance.
The meathead ordinance, exactly. That's what we call that one. These are all these internal names that we gave to things. The big one was extended hours. So we introduced the idea that, hey, a lot of the problem that if you look at the data, the problem is happening in a very predictable pattern. It's at a very specific time in very specific areas, and all of the same problems happen every single time. So maybe we're causing the problem.
I want to talk a little bit more about that after, but just how did this mayor's initiative end up? You know, I mean, how well was it received, and do you think it had a big impact?
Yeah, so we were able to get a really broad coalition. That was the important part. Everybody could see themselves in it to some degree. The residents who were kind of framed as anti-nightlife had some of the desires that they wanted in there. The club owners had some of the ideas that they wanted in there, and the city and government and enforcement agencies had some of they wanted in there. So everybody felt like compromise was being made and a coalition was there, and it was presented as a coalition. Now, we had a mayor who was supportive, we had a city attorney who was supportive, and we had some council members who were supportive. So that was in our favor to try to advance something like this. But we didn't just rest on that. We really worked hard to get more people under it, create a really big tent, and drive it forward. And that worked pretty much across the board for 7 of the 8 initiatives.
There was just a woman out of Berlin who was interviewed talking about the whole closing time hour issue. And, you know, it was almost as if it just kind of occurred to her. But when we worked together, because I did some background research and gave a report for you, and then you modified it and really made it better, I think, in terms of a campaign. And you had everybody behind it, including the police. And you went to the Washington Liquor Control Board because they had to sign off on it.
You're talking specifically about the extended hours.
Extended hours, yeah. And so, and it seemed to make a lot of sense, but somehow or another it stalled and it didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, that was, I mean, it's a big lift to try to get extended hours. We reframed it. Instead of calling it extended hours, called it flexible hours. And in the state of Washington, the control of who can have those kind of hours is dictated by the state government in Olympia. And so Seattle couldn't even change its hours if it wanted to. So we had kind of a 2-step campaign. First one was just to go to the state and say, cities and jurisdictions have different problems in different parts of the state, and you should be able to let them handle it in the ways that's most appropriate for them. So give us an option. So that we wanted that flexibility as an option to have extended hours. We weren't saying we were going to do it. We just want the legal option to do that. So that was the very first hurdle. And we were able to get quite a bit of support. We got a letter from the Washington State Patrol. We got a letter from the Association of Washington Cities. We found support on the other side of the mountains in Eastern Washington, all of whom said, you know, the idea of local options could work for us. And then what we try to say to the state is, you could put any kind of conditions on there you want that seem fair. We'll try to meet those and, you know, put it forward. And I think the effort that we made, the extended hours pitch was really good.
I think one of the key points, as I recall, is that it wouldn't be ultimately the state would give the city authority, but it would be the city that would define the terms and would be willing to take away that right, that it didn't have to go back to the state to take away the right. So you really made the right of flexible hours something that the city controlled with the authority of the state, but the state isn't the one that would come in and remove it. If the city felt the operator wasn't living up to the conditions or to the standards that you wanted, it would be the city that would say, sorry, you have to go back to the way it was. I thought that was a brilliant way to make it, because right now in fact, we have a conversation tomorrow about this, but the problem is that if there's a problematic business, it takes so long for the state to actually come in and do anything.
Yeah, we took this very layered approach so that we were basically creating a new liquor license that allowed you to stay open later. And we tied all kinds of public safety conditions to that license. It would only be available to the best operator. So we're trying to incentivize good behavior. If you were a good operator, you got the license and you could have extended hours. And then if you didn't, then the city could take it away. And then the states could take away the city's local option if it found the city wasn't doing its job managing the operators who weren't doing their job. So we had this layered approach on this license. I thought it was great. It did go to the Liquor Control Board of the state. There's a Liquor Control Board in in Washington. It was 3 people at the time. And we didn't get all 3 votes. We got 2 votes and then 1 vote that went against it. And the reason they went against it was because, this is what they said publicly at the time, was that cannabis and legalized marijuana, recreational marijuana, had just been approved by the voters that exact same year. And the Liquor Control Board was being tasked with enforcing and controlling it. And they just said that it was too much too soon, that they couldn't manage it, and to come back another time. Now, who knows how politically true or convenient that was for them to say that, but that was some of the reasons they gave. There is talk of revisiting this from a strong public safety point of view, and I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Well, James, this has been an enlightening conversation. You clearly were a great leader in making all of these changes happening, and it was a great partnership that we had over the years. And
I loved it.
yeah, I think you helped inspire me in so many different ways, including understanding more about music and its relevance and importance. So yeah, you're a great figure in all of this movement, and I appreciate your spending time. And any last words about our 40th anniversary that you want to say about RHI and what it meant to Seattle?
Well, I will say I appreciate the compliments, but I mean this sincerely, I wouldn't have been able to have any of those achievements or any of those positive outcomes without you. It just would not have happened. I wouldn't even have the ideas to do some of these things, let alone felt the kind of the ammunition to actually carry them out and move them forward, and the power to do that. So you were instrumental in that. And I would just, any city that's struggling with these issues, and these are age-old issues. That's a thing. Here's what I'll say. None of this is new. We've all been struggling. In Seattle, many other cities struggle with this and have been for decades. It's only when you take a new look at it. You don't go in with this enforcement first, knock them down, and then it all go away. It doesn't work. It never has. The problem surfaces itself again in other ways, probably worse. But if you take a more positive, inclusive approach to it, and that's what RHI has done, taught me how to do, then you can get the different kind of outcomes. Otherwise, you're just going to get the same results. So I guess that's after 40 years, summary. You have enough information to be able to look at the data, and then you can predict the future.
All right. Well, thank you, James. This has been great, and great talking with you. And it was always great to meet your family. And I look forward to seeing your sons and seeing if they look like you.
Anytime you're in Seattle.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim.